It was the light that woke me. Not a light like the sun, something thinner, a blue hum that slid through my ceiling as if the roof were only imagined. 3 nights. 3 nights that rewrote the map of my life. Floating above my bed was an answer I had been chasing without knowing its shape. The being looked at me with eyes that held small galaxies and said, simply, "You are coded for maximum luck. Your protocol is off." What if I told you every one of us is born with luck wired in, and most of us live with the switch turned down? I was 49 and running out of plausible explanations for why things kept breaking. Mornings smelled of cheap coffee and yesterday's paper. The radiator clicked in a rhythm I had come to think of as my heartbeat. I would sit at my small desk, the lamp throwing a circle of tired light over spreadsheets, and count like someone tracing the outlines of a leak. The bank's letters were folded in a tidy stack, wedges of ink that looked, to my chest, like small knives. The apartment had become a map of scarcity. Receipts crowded the countertop. A stack of unopened envelopes breathed dust when I lifted them. I slept like someone guarding a wound. One eye half open, one hand clamped to the blanket. My breath was quick. My shoulders were always just behind me, as if they expected a shove. I told myself plans. I told myself tomorrow. I rehearsed negotiations under my breath while brushing my teeth. Tomorrow will be different, I said into the mirror, and the mirror gave me back the same tired face. My brother used to say, "Rodrigo, be realistic." He said it like a blessing against disappointment. He meant to protect me from foolishness. I swallowed his realism like medicine I didn't want but believed I needed. Work was a series of small disappointments that set the tone for everything else. A client would call to postpone. A proposal would vanish in a flurry of polite refusals. The small office, one faded poster, one dying plant felt like a courtroom where every number testified against me. I kept the plant on the windowsill because some habit required it. I would water it and speak to it as if coaxing life from a stone. The plant drooped on some mornings and revived on others. I measured my luck by its leaves. There were physical habits that sealed my poverty like mortar. I chewed the inside of my cheek until it bled. I slept with the light on because the dark felt like accusation. I avoided restaurants with linen napkins, the way a soldier avoids open ground. I refused risks that carried even the smallest chance of beauty. I learned to speak in small asks. I learned to expect small returns. Some nights the city sounded like a slow exhale. The streetlights hummed. The tinny radio of a passing car played a melody I could not place. I would walk to the corner and look up at the sky, at the hum of sodium lights, and feel some small ache of loneliness. There was a hunger in me I had named ambition when I was young, but now it tasted like an unpaid bill. The wound was more than money. It sat heavy in my lungs. I woke with a chest full of stone and a mouth that tasted like fear. The nearest faces my sister Laura. My brother had grown used to a particular version of me. Cautious, beaten in, practical. They loved me by folding their expectations around my fear. My sister would bring pamphlets, names of counselors, suggestions for rest. "Take a break," they'd say, as if time alone could fix a frequency. Then, the light began to answer me back. It started as a glint on the window, a reflection I told myself came from a passing van or a neon sign. I paused on the street and pressed my palm to the cool glass of a shop front because the world often sends small signals before larger ones. The glint returned the next day in a slightly different place. It felt like someone tapping at the other side of the world to get attention. On the day my loan was denied for the 3rd time, the bank's voice on the phone carried its usual blend of regret and policy. I walked home with the rejection in my pocket like a stone. In the window of my apartment building, the light flickered then steadied. It was the sort of color that made the usual streetlights look sickly. The air felt thicker, like a room after rain. I did not yet know whether to be afraid or curious. Fear and curiosity both live in the same small space under the ribs, and that day curiosity nudged the fear sideways. I remember putting the key into the lock and pausing, listening. The city was a low hum. My building breathed the hush of evening. The light on my windowsill did not belong to any lamp I could imagine. The night it happened, I woke to a sound that was less noise and more pressure, like a distant machine taking a breath. The light in my room was blue, not the blue of any lamp, but the blue of a memory of the sea. It poured over the ceiling and the books and the stains on the rug. The air tasted faintly metallic. I could feel the temperature change from my ankles upward. It was subtle and then not. My chest tightened and loosened like a bell. I reached instinctively for my phone. The screen met my finger like a cold coin and then blacked out. The hum grew near, and in that nearness I felt my own heartbeat, as if I had put an ear to a drum. Then there was a figure tall, too fluid for human bones. It hovered a few inches above the floor. My body wanted to recoil. It felt heavy in a way that made my legs slow and generous with doubt. The figure had no face I could keep. It was like trying to remember someone you saw in a fog. But the eyes, if I can call them, that held depth the way a sea holds weight. I felt seen in a way I had not felt since childhood. The voice did not pass through my ears so much as through the center of my skull. It spoke with an economy that left room for meaning. "I have watched your frequency," it said. The words were not loud. They were exact. "You vibrate in dissonance with your nature." I tried to move and found my body heavy as if wrapped in thick cloth. My chest ballooned with a small, clumsy courage. "Who are you? What do you want?" I managed. My voice sounded small even to me. The being made a movement like a hand brushing water. The air between us rippled with light, like heat above asphalt. "Name's limit. I adjust frequencies." I thought of engineers and radio dials in an old repair shop in my neighborhood. I thought of the radio my grandfather used to coax music out of static. The idea of tuning something inside of me felt almost laughable. And yet I felt, like finger to a metal plate, a resonance click into place. "You're not meant for the shortage you've been living," the band of blue said. "Abundance is your natural state." Something vibrated inside me like a plucked string. It was a small note that arched into something broader and then flattened into silence. I felt a strange, painful hope. Then the light swallowed me. When I woke the next morning, I reached automatically for the wrist I always checked for time. There was a mark of faint, silver glyph pressed into my skin as if by moonlight. It shifted shape when I tried not to look directly at it. The coffee smelled sharper. The air in the kitchen felt somehow closer, as if possibility had taken residence in the room. That day, things began to answer before I finished asking. I rummaged for a pen I'd lost weeks earlier. My hand closed on it in the drawer that never held that pen. My phone rang as I pictured an old client. It was him, offering a project that would pay 3 times what I expected. The shifts were small and then cumulative, like the first drops of rain that lead to a flood. Still, the world pushed back. At the office, my partner Marcos watched me with a kind of clinical alarm. He had always been a man of spreadsheets and tight necklines. He saw the bills on the table and the improbable way I smiled at them. "You're not serious," he said. "You look like a dreamer. We have real liabilities." I told him what I could carefully, like setting a fragile glass on a table. I told him about the light, the voice, the mark that changed when I wasn't looking. He rounded his shoulders and said things people say to protect themselves from mystery. "You need to be practical," he said. "This sounds like stress." Laura arrived to bundle me in souvenirs of concern pamphlets, phone numbers, offers to help with the plumbing. She folded her worry into the kind of neat squares people hand over when they want to fix someone else's life without touching the real work. "Take a vacation," she suggested. "Sleep. See a doctor." Their skepticism landed on me like cold water. I felt it seep into the small spaces where my new resonance had begun to grow. Doubt is not just an idea, it is a tangible thing. It sits on the tongue, it makes the chest tight. I drove home with a silence between my thoughts that felt like a question. In the evening the blue returned deeper. The figure hovered again and asked me to sit. "This is practical," it said. This is not charm. This is a calibration. A kind of sleep that was not sleep came upon me. I dreamed of doors opening without handles. I dreamed of ducks on a pond I recognized as my childhood pond. But now the water was full of coins and clear as glass. When I woke, the mark on my wrist was still there, but less like a brand and more like a key. I went to bed carrying an unusual companion, the willingness to act as if the new frequency were already true. The next morning I walked into the office and behaved differently. Not loudly, not foolishly, simply differently. My posture altered as if someone had tightened a rope along my spine. My voice found a timbre of ease. I sat down with the invoices and greeted them with a lightness that felt illegal. Marcos watched me and frowned. "You look as if you've been paid," he observed. "I have not," I said. "Not yet, but I move as if the accounts are already balanced." He looked at me the way you look at a friend who has taken an inexplicable turn. That look is a test. He left the office that day muttering about audits. He told clients I was taking more risks. Some left, some returned. One man, Victor, returned not only with respect, but with a contract that would change the company's cash flow. Another client offered a bonus that happened to cover my mortgage exactly. I want to be honest. The changes did not feel like magic in a storybook. They felt like a complex plumbing repair. Some pipes unclogged, others still sputtered. I cried in the stairwell once, the sound small and ridiculous, because I had not cried in years and the body needed proof that something had moved. Doubt kept knocking. Friends asked if I was on medication. A neighbor said some kind of cough syrup had been prescribed for people who talked about frequency. I learned to hold my private knowledge like a fragile specimen under glass. I did not shout it. I allowed the world to confirm what my body had already started to know. And all the while the mark at my wrist shifted. It would morph when I turned my hand, like a language that refused to be read directly. This change was a sign, not the sign. It was a hinge. There is a point in any story where what was internal begins to show on the surface. The city notices when a person stops moving like a person in debt. People begin to ask questions they mean to be casual. My neighbor started bringing small gifts, a jar of preserves, an extra loaf. A woman in the elevator asked, suddenly, "Have you been traveling?" As if I had been somewhere and come back porous with experience. I could not tell her where I'd been. I practiced my small internal proclamations every morning, the loops the being gave me. They were short and oddly musical. I am the field that draws good things. I stand as luck does, steady and unasked. I carry the quiet certainty of abundance. I said them aloud sometimes, whispering them like secrets to the steam of my coffee. The voice inside me shifted with repetition. It was as if each loop rewired a subtle circuit. The light had not come to give me a lottery. It came to adjust me to a new operating system, to pull a worn wire free so that current might pass. There would be a bigger test ahead. A shape of real consequence waited like a shadow on the other side of the day. I felt the weight of it whenever the city quieted and the radiator's click sounded especially loud. The being had promised practical work, not miracles. It had said, "Act from the state you want to hold." That sounded simple and impossibly difficult, the work of a lifetime compressed into a breath. When I closed my eyes that night, the glyph on my wrist pulsed faintly. The air smelled of rain and possibility. I remembered something childish, a kite I had let go of once, and the way it had climbed on its own. The thought was small and electric. The next step would ask me to risk more than letters on a page. It would ask me to face the world as if the code were on, even when ripples of doubt tried to turn it off. Tomorrow, the world would test whether my new state was habit or costume. The promise sat just beyond sleep, a demonstration that would change the measure of the possible. I did not yet know how to be ready, but I was less afraid than I had been the week before. And that, in itself, felt like the first real sign of change. It was a sound like distant thunder, but smaller. An insect chorus turned very slow. I woke with the taste of metal behind my teeth. The room was a pool of blue. The light did not come from any bulb. It moved with intention, sliding across the walls like a second daylight. The air felt textured, not simply present. It had weight. My breath met it and found resistance, the way lungs feel when you climb stairs you know too well. My ears popped, a gentle pressure like the prelude to diving. I remember the mattress seemed strange beneath me, as if I were lying on a raft rather than a bed. Then the figure was there, tall, limbs too long to be human, but not threatening. It hovered with a steadiness that made my jaw unclench. The outline shimmered. I could not trust any label for it. It was not monster, not angel, not machine. It was some careful arrangement of light and intent. It looked at me, and I felt my own face as if through water softened, more honest. The eyes, vast as galaxies, contained not a reflection but an archive. I could sense time in them, small seasons, weather, awards I had not received, chances I had refused. I have observed your signal, the presence said, not with lips but with a precise pressure inside my head. The words fell like stones into a quiet pond. You have been vibrating out of phase with your nature. I tried to lift my hand. Muscle obeyed. My arm felt like a foreign country I had not visited in years. Who are you? I asked, listening to how small the question sounded in that room. They name me by function, it replied. I adjust frequencies. The room hummed. What might have been air became something like fabric. The being extended a finger. The motion made the dust in my apartment hold itself in a pattern for a long moment. The air between us shivered like heat above a road. I felt a rush of vertigo and, with it, an odd clarity. This was not about proof. It was about calibration. Why me? I asked, because humans ask why as a way to position themselves. Why this? Why now? Not chosen like lightning strikes, it said. Selected as necessary. Many fields sleep. You are one that could remain dormant. There was a tenderness that was not sentimental. It felt like when a doctor lays a hand to your shoulder and trusts you to breathe. My shoulders relaxed despite myself. A strange thing. Fear thinned, replaced by something akin to curiosity, the fierce kind that steadies your hands. It taught me through small exercises. The first asked nothing more than attention. Sit, it said. I sat. Breathe, it instructed. I breathed, counting without counting, feeling the ribs expand like bellows. Place your image of luck not as a future prize, but as a present identity. I pictured my life as a shop window. Until then, I had arranged items behind glass with signs that read please, sorry, later. It told me to rearrange the display, to place abundance in the forefront, calm, ordinary, expected. Not brash, not greedy, just available. Declare, it said, not as wishful thinking, as recognition. The first time I spoke in that room, my voice shook. I am the man luck moves through, I said, and the sentence felt ridiculous and then vital. The being did not applaud. It did something stranger. It folded the sound into the room and let the room accept it. Afterwards, it gave me a test, simple, designed so the world could answer. Tomorrow, it said, act as the man you declared, not performatively, with the weight of truth. I left that night with the thin glove of sleep over my eyes. The glyph on my wrist glowed faintly and seemed to map itself to the pulse. The city outside had its usual respiration. Taxis needled through the dark, a dog barked somewhere, a couple argued about nothing. The ordinary kept living as if nothing had shifted. That steadiness felt like permission. The next day was a calculus of small acts. I dressed not in wishfulness, but in sober confidence. I straightened my back and moved with the rhythm of someone who expected doors to open. I answered emails with an ease that felt like a muscle learning a new gait. I did not shout my declaration. I held it close, a cord under the skin. The world responded. Not with thunder, but with the practical nods of a life that untangled. A former client called, then another, numbers that filled in the spaces so hunger had fewer corners. A bonus arrived from a job we'd thought closed. Each event alone was small. Together they aligned like teeth in a clasp. Yet the true trial did not come in money. It came in resistance. Marcos watched me with the plant on my windowsill, which had been a barometer of my mood for years, unfurled a new leaf. But the essence of the test was not external. It lived in my choices, whether to speak my new identity aloud when it would be mocked, whether to keep moving as if the calibration had become habit. Doubt is a social instrument. It is sharpest when wielded by those you love. Laura called one night, voice soft with care. "Are you sure this is safe?" she asked. Her fear was a mirror of mine at times. I did not want to frighten her or lose her confidence. "I am learning," I said. "I am practicing a new way of existing." She was quiet a long moment. "Just promise me you'll be careful," she said. I promised. I did not promise to stop moving. Promise is a language we use to tether each other. I felt the tether loosen and tighten in that call, and I understood the cost of change. The being visited again in the quiet of an hour when my apartment hummed and the city felt like a living organ. It showed me a map unlike any geography I had learned, a lattice of lines that smelled faintly of ozone and coffee, a network of points that were not cities but frequencies. "You will meet others," it said. "You will become a node." I pictured that lattice like a city seen from above. My life, my small office, my kitchen table, this mark on my wrist sat as one knot in a vast tapestry. The role it offered was not prestige. It was alignment. Become steady, and others who vibrate near your pitch will gravitate without coercion. Find not by searching, the being instructed, but by stabilizing. I did not know how to stabilize other than to be consistent. Each morning I stepped into the loops. I breathed. I declared the short phrases into the air as if planting seeds, and I walked into the day with the posture of someone who had been paid. The loops were simple and new. I am calm, and luck arranges itself. I act from the state I hold. I am the open field, not the closed fist. They were not mantras of magical thinking. They were practice. They turned into habits. My voice settled into a register that people heard and trusted. My hands stopped fidgeting. I made decisions with a clarity that had not been mine in years. Slowly, the outer world matched the inner rhythm. People who could not have noticed before began to notice. Invitations arrived. A call to speak at a small forum about small business accounting. A neighbor asking if I could advise on a tax matter. An old colleague requesting a partnership. These events were not fireworks. They were doors clicking open, one by one. There were moments of sheer astonishment. A man I had not seen in years walked into my office and apologized for an old debt, producing a check that changed the arithmetic of my month. I felt my chest unclench with each receipt. Relief is an odd shape. It is at once molecular and moral. And yet there remained the quiet test of identity. Was I luck's servant or its steward? Did I become a person who used appearance and intent to manipulate outcomes? Or did I truly shift from lack to sovereign openness? The being watched as if counting seasons in a wristwatch and said nothing. It left me to find the answer inside my own choices. One night, alone on the rooftop of the building I had just bought a purchase that once would have been impossible, I looked at the city spread like a skin of lights. The glyph on my wrist was faint. When I turned the hand, it gambled like a small animal. I placed my palm flat on the parapet and felt my breath steady. The air smelled of hot tar and faraway rain. Somewhere below, a radio played a song I knew by heart. I thought of the man I had been, compacted into small assumptions, making bargains with fear. I thought of the man I had become, still human, still flawed, but willing to stand as if luck were someone I lived with. The difference was not in riches or in a sudden abundance. It was in the center of my chest, where a warmth had taken root. The being returned one last time before the light withdrew. It moved closer and, for the first time, allowed something like a smile to pass across a form I could not fully name. "You have learned to inhabit a frequency," it said. "Use it with care." "What now?" I asked. My voice was quieter than before. I had learned to be smaller with mystery, to not demand answers like a child demanding sweets. "You will be a beacon, it replied. Those ready will feel the pull. You will not need to seek them. Your task is to hold the state, not to gather followers. It touched my wrist. The glyph pulsed, and then seeped into my skin as if dissolving into a fabric I already wore. The reminder leaves. The pattern remains. Then the light thinned and folded back into whatever sky it had come from. The pressure in my ears eased. The air became ordinary. I held for a moment the echo of its voice and the tenderness with which it had guided me. Alone with my thinking, I understood the shape of what had happened. This was not a theft of effort, nor a gift that absolved work. It was an orientation. The world did not rearrange for me without cause. I had rearranged myself enough that the world could respond differently. I learned also that aligning with abundance requires boundaries. I set them slowly. What I would accept and what I would refuse, how I would spend the money that once felt like a bitter fruit. I repaired relationships that had frayed with honesty. I kept my humility like a tool rather than a shrine. There was one small, stubborn lesson I kept repeating to myself when fear crept near. Certainty is a muscle. You strengthen it by moving from it, not toward it. So I moved through practice, through failure, through stubborn repetition of small truths. The next morning the city looked less like an opponent and more like a place that could host my life. I walked to the small shop and bought bread without doing the mental math first. I smiled at the clerk, and the smile did not feel like performance. It felt like currency that circulates freely. Later that day, a woman in a cafe looked at me and asked, not unkindly, "How did you do it?" Her voice was curious, not skeptical. I looked at the steam rising from my coffee, at the light making dust visible, and I answered simply, because by then I had come to know the simplest form was also the truest. I learned to be the field that attracts, I said. I stopped asking the world for permission to have what I needed. I remembered who I was meant to be. She nodded, as if she recognized something she had tasted before. She did not demand instructions. Perhaps she would discover them in her own time. That evening, on my rooftop, I felt neither complete nor undone. I felt calibrated. The mark the being left went soft and then quiet. The work, as always, continued. There would be storms. There would be losses that felt like returns to old weather. But there was now an internal instrument I could tune. I had a voice to speak to the world from, and it hardly mattered whether anyone else believed. The proof was in the daily, small rearrangements that now answered me back. And somewhere, beyond the city, in a lattice of frequencies, other far-off nodes would begin to stir. I was a point in that net. I had been changed enough to be useful. The next evening I closed my eyes and breathed. I let the loops run like a small engine in my chest. I am steady. Luck moves through me. I hold my frequency. I breathed again. The air was ordinary, and the room full of possibilities. The door out of my old life had opened not with fireworks, but with a quiet, steady hinge. I stepped through and kept walking. I woke believing it had been a dream, and the apartment insisted it had not been. The silver glyph on my wrist was proof thin, alive, changing when I blinked. It felt like a seam of moonlight sewn under my skin. The kitchen smelled sharper that morning. The coffee cut through the air with a new edge. My hands trembled, not with fear exactly, but with a readiness I had not known how to hold. I moved through the flat like a man feeling for a pulse. My fingers brushed a stack of papers. A gust of light from the window slanted across the desk, and, absurdly, a pen I'd sworn gone forever was there, resting across a ledger. The sound of the street below filtered up a bus brake, the laugh of a boy, and my phone rang, as if the city itself answered the small demand I hadn't claimed out loud. The call was from an old client. He wanted to reopen a contract, and the number he mentioned made my chest loosen as if someone had unscrewed a bolt inside me. It was too quick to be luck by habit and too patterned to be random. The glyph pulsed once, as if noting the event. I walked to the window. Light moved across the glass in a slow, deliberate tide. I touched the mark on my wrist. My palm felt cool and real, like the rest of me. and yet different like a key newly turned. I said to the room, to the day, to whatever listened. These were small miracles, domestic and practical. Each one felt like a calibration, a dial turned, a resistance eased. I began to practice small declarations, not as wishes but as statements of fact. They were short, tactile exercises, a trouser's pocket ritual, a grounded word spoken into the collar of my shirt. I said aloud, while buttoning my coat, "I am open, an opportunity arrives." I put my hand over my chest and felt the pulse under the glyph. The phrase settled a fraction deeper each time. My breath shortened, then lengthened. My steps lost a small, habitual hesitation. There is a quality to first evidence. It is domestic and improbable. It will not arrive like fireworks. It will arrive like bread warmed in an oven. Still, evidence insists on more evidence. I felt curious and cautious in equal measures. The small confirmations made a map, but the map asked for a crossing, a test that would separate habit from truth. I was asked to stand at the doorway of my life and choose whether I would walk through or retreat. The next demonstration would be simple in form and decisive in consequence. The world said it would answer in a way I could not rationalize away. I had to be ready to move differently, and to hold that movement when others pressed against it. Mini cliffhanger. A morning promise would soon become a public proof, and my posture would be the first thing tested. The experiment began with a chair and my breath. The entity told me not to imagine riches, but to be a body that money and favor found natural. So I sat. The chair was ordinary, wood rubbed by years of use. I steadied my feet on the floor, felt the grain, and let the lungs fold and unfold like bellows. The apartment hummed radiator, distant traffic, and I made the sound of that hum my measure. The exercise was simple, sensory. Posture, breath, image, declaration. First block, attention to posture. I stood and felt my spine align as if someone dropped a string from above and tightened it. My shoulders loosened and my gaze found the line of the horizon through the window. I walked to the office feeling the new rope in my back. In the meeting that afternoon, I did not push. I observed facts and spoke with a quiet that had weight. A client who had been undecided signed, not because I convinced him with words, but because my steadiness made agreement easier. The small bell in my chest confirmed. Posture retuned outcome. Loop. I stand steady. Opportunity leans toward stillness. Second block. Attention to breath and word seed. The entity taught me to place a single word at the heart of each inhale. It must be a word that slices history short and opens the present. My seed was simple. Open. Breathe in. Open. Exhale. Release doubt. I did this in the elevator, under fluorescent light that smelled faintly of metal and bleach. The pattern changed my voice. The syllables sat under sentences like a foundation. My accounts manager called that evening with a payment that had been delayed for months. She apologized and told me it was on the way. There was no triumph in her tone, just the logistical hum of something resolving. Loop. I breathe open, doors align. Third block. Image as identity. I was told to imagine not the result, but the person who already lived with it. I pictured my hands steady on a desk, my ledger balanced, a neighbor bringing over a loaf because generosity had become the currency I circulated. I imagined the ordinary comforts I had once been afraid to own. The image was domestic, not flashy. Feeling it in my body rewired the small, anxious circuits. When a dispute over fees arose at the end of that week, my posture and breath allowed me to negotiate without shrinking. The dispute resolved in a way that covered months of rent. Loop. I am the man who keeps accounts. The accounts keep me. Fourth block. Micro actions in public. The entity insisted the test must be public enough to sting if it failed. I chose a poor moment to practice. A ledger review with Marcos in the office, his forehead a map of worry. We spoke numbers, dry and small, and I refused the old habit of apologizing before speaking. I spoke from the state I had cultivated, calm, certain, precise. Marcos's face folded into something like suspicion, then interest. After the meeting, a former client called back and offered a contract they had been considering for months. It was not theatrics. It was the predictable work of someone who had ceased to tremble. Mini cliffhanger. The experiment would widen. A public test would ask for a refusal to perform the same state in the face of scorning voices. Fifth block. Ritual of anchor objects. I took an ordinary spoon from my drawer and kept it in my pocket as a tactile reminder. Whenever doubt rose, my thumb found the spoon head and the body remembered the chair, the breath, the seed word. I used the spoon in a small way to stir coffee before a call, to hold while waiting for a bank transfer, and the object anchored the state. The practice was boring, relentless, and invisible. But here was the pattern. The world answered to consistent inner posture. Examples multiplied. An overdue invoice arrived with an apology and a full amount. A neighbor returned a favor with unexpected kindness, a jar of preserves left at my door. A man in a market offered me a referral that became a month's steady work. None of these were miracles of instant wealth. They were the plumbing changing, the pipes unclogging over time. My chest learned how to keep its warmth. I will be honest, the experiment was not smooth. There were nights where the old weather returned, where the glyph on my wrist felt like a relic that could not continue to bear weight. On those nights, I practiced smaller. Breathe open, stand steady, name the person I was becoming. The rituals were instruments. I learned to play them even when my hands shook. Loop cluster, practical. I stand steady. I breathe open. I act from the man I already am. The loops folded into habit like grooves into wood. The evidence was cumulative. Each exercise counted. The world stopped being a series of apologies and became a ledger that balanced more often than not. Still, the true test would not be the gentle confirmations. It would be when voices I loved and needed would try to unbalance me. The next trial would be social. My inner state against the skepticism of those closest. Mini cliffhanger. The coming clash would prove whether my state was costume or core. Skepticism arrived with voices I trusted. Marcos rounded his shoulders like armor and asked for figures the way a man asks for coin. Laura brought brochures and a softness that hurt. They wanted me well on terms they could understand. Therapy, rest, evidence, and charts. They did not see the change as an orientation. They saw it as a phase or a breakdown. The first confrontation happened in the office at noon. Light spilled across spreadsheets. Marco stood over a sheaf of invoices and said, plainly, "This is reckless. We need guarantees, Rodrigo." His voice had the texture of a man afraid of being wrong for other people's sake. I felt the old reflex, to shrink, to apologize. Instead, I felt the spine I had practiced. I breathed. I said, quietly, "We move differently now. I will hold the position. You will hold the calculation." He laughed a short laugh that held panic. A client threatened to leave that afternoon. I did not chase her. I sent a clear proposal and let silence be the boundary I had learned. I will not romanticize this. The world pushed back. People we love are often the first to try to return us to the known map. Laura sat across from me with pamphlets and worry in her hands. "You have to be careful," she said. Her fingers trembled. Her fear felt like gravity. I listened. I told her I understood. I told her I was cautious in a new way. That night, I lay awake with a pressure at the base of my skull. Doubt is social. It is language that can become a toxin. A more concrete attack arrived. The landlord called about repairs we had delayed. The bank sent another terse letter. The numbers did not care about intention. I took them as tests. I applied the rituals where it mattered. Posture at the phone, breath before the landlord, the spoon in my pocket when talking to the bank officer. I negotiated with steadiness. The landlord agreed to a staged repair. The bank offered a temporary extension. None of this was magic. It was stamina married to clarity. There were tender bruises. A friend mocked the frequency like a joke, and the sound stung because humility is earned. A reporter called with a skeptical tone and asked directly, "Are you inventing this?" I answered honestly. I said that I was practicing a different way to stand in the world. No miracles promised. Just practice. The project demanded hours and care. It required me to be steady in an expanded way. 2 weeks later, with the new contract humming, a different kind of test came. A small forum invited me to speak about business resilience. I accepted. I prepared not a pitch, but a simple account of methods. Sit, breathe, declare. The room was full of people who traded numbers for security. Some laughed. Some leaned forward. I was honest about the cost, the choice to keep showing up despite mockery, the discipline of repetition. Afterward, a woman approached quietly and said she had been practicing a version of the loops and had finally reconnected with her estranged son. Her eyes wet. She said, "It saved us." The moment felt like a bright coin dropped into the well of my life. Limits remained. I did not grow immune to fear, but I learned to respect endurance over speed. I kept my rituals. I kept the spoon. I wrote short loops and said them when doubt circled. I stand steady. I speak from the center. I allow help and honor boundaries. These were my new verbs. They folded into daily choices. Who I met, which projects I accepted, how I spent money that felt newly mine. I repaired relationships with honesty, not with grand promises. I set boundaries with neighbors and friends. The glyph on my wrist shifted as if pleased. The resistance had done something unexpected. It clarified. When people doubted, I had to sharpen the how. That made the method less mystical and more replicable. It became an instrument I could teach by action rather than explanation. The next moment would be the true hinge. I would be asked to use everything I had learned, the posture, the breath, the words, the humility, and the boundary in a way that solved the cost I had carried for years. The world would not only test me with skepticism, it would offer the exact situation that had nearly broken me before. My response would either close the loop or leave me back where I'd started. Mini cliffhanger. Tomorrow I would meet the precise problem that had named my limits, and the answer would demand that I not only hold the state, but extend it outward, public and irreversible. The morning was colder than I expected. Window glass tasted like a thin sheet between me and the city. My spoon sat against my thigh in my pocket, metal warm from my body. I felt the weight of it as if it were a talisman and a tool. I breathed and let the cold edge of the day map itself across my face. The apartment smelled of old paper and coffee. The radiator clicked a steady metronome. I set my spine as I had practiced. Chin level, chest open, a slow tightening from the base of my skull down my spine like a string being pulled taut. The posture did something to the air in the room. It felt denser, like someone had tightened a drum head. I noticed my hands. They were not shaking. There was a meeting scheduled at 9 with a group that could undo everything I'd rebuilt. A partner from months ago, a man who had threatened to withdraw funding because of instability, and the bank's legal rep, the thing that had named my limits, the exact situation that had nearly broken me, would be placed in the same room with my new state. I dressed as if I were meeting a tide. Plain, clean, unassertive on the surface, anchored beneath. I stuck the spoon in my pocket. Before I left, I stepped to the mirror and said quietly to the skin at my throat, "I am the man who receives right timing." The words felt ridiculous and true at once. They steadied the mouth. On the walk, the city felt acoustically different. Tires hissed. A dog barked like an old bell. I practiced the seed word on the inhale, open, and the sound sat under my jaw like a foundation. At the building's revolving door, the world compressed and released. People brushed me. An elevator cough, a fluorescent light. My palms were cool when I reached the conference table. The smell of new leather and disinfectant. The partner's hands were a map of old refused promises. The bank rep smelled like starch and small anger. They began with old language, clauses, litany of contingency, the numbers shaved and examined. Marcos's name came up with the recoil of someone poking a bruise. I could feel the old reflex to explain, to beg, to patch with words. Instead, I felt the rope down my spine. I placed my thumbs on the spoon in my pocket without moving my face. The spoon was the press of a remembered chair, the whisper of the entity's instruction. I breathed in open and allowed my voice to be low and even. "This is how we move forward," I said. "I will meet the obligations we can meet now. I will create a staged plan for what remains. And I will not trade my clarity for a false comfort." My words were concise as ledger entries. They had no apology. The partner laughed a brittle laugh. The bank rep leaned in to catch a slip. Nothing happened. I had expected a sting. Instead, the room filled with the small mechanics of negotiation. Numbers rearranged. A concession appeared where I had not asked. A clause softened, and the partner offered a phased release of funds contingent on deliverables we could deliver. The legal rep put down his pen as if surprised by his own hand. There were tiny details that felt like proof. A call that afternoon from a vendor who cleared an invoice. A client who signed without renegotiation because the tone of my voice made the offer simpler to accept. The spoon in my pocket warmed, and the knot at the base of my throat loosened. I did not feel saved by luck. I felt the plumbing of my life rearrange in response to a new center of gravity. The problem had been the test, and the test had been passed. The room exhaled. Later that night, I walked home with a slow smile that surprised the skin on my face. I paid a bill online and watched the bank confirmation ping like a small bell. I allowed myself a moment to feel what it was to close a loop that had tightened around me for years. My chest held a heat that was not mere relief. It was a recognition. The rituals worked in public, at scale. They moved real people, made contracts possible, altered decisions. I will be honest, a shadow of fear still comes sometimes. The old weather knows how to call me. But now when it arrives, I take the spoon, I breathe the word, and I stand. I do not need everyone to understand. I only need the state to be true where it matters. Mini cliffhanger. The next visit would ask for more than negotiation. It would demand that I extend this state outward, resolutely and publicly. The world would ask me to become the instrument, not merely the beneficiary. The entity returned that night, not with lights this time, but in the small language of muscle memory. It arrived as a clarity that sat behind my eyes, as if the room had been tuned to a precise frequency and the dial stayed set. I made tea. Steam rose and traced slow moons. The air in the kitchen hummed like a wire. I sat at the table and let the temperature sink into my palms. The spoon lay on the plate like a symbol waiting for a language. When the voice came, it was not a voice from the ceiling, but the voice of the practice I had done until it had a shape. It spoke in fragments, the way a river speaks by touching stone. "Remember the grammar," the presence said. Not the wish, the grammar. I asked what that meant. The answer was brief, crystalline. Identity precedes event. Posture precedes opportunity. Breath precedes decision. Word precedes outcome. I had to translate each of those pieces into something I could hold at the table. So I did what the entity had taught me. I turned them into verbs inside my body. I shaped them into procedure. Posture, stand, even when your knees want to give. Practiced before the small tasks, the call to the landlord. The walk into a meeting posture changes your voice and your negotiation table. I felt it in my feet first, the ground answering the chord along my spine. Breath, my seed word, open road every inhale. The breath was a scalpel. I learned to use 3-part breaths when stakes rose. Inhale long, hold the center, exhale long. The middle held the state. I practiced it in the supermarket queue. I practiced it at red lights. Word, internal declarations became the scaffolding for action. Not fantasies, but identity statements. I am the one who keeps accounts steady. I accept help and keep my boundaries. These lines turned into filters for choices. Which clients, which calls, which late-night agreements. Action, micro-actions made the invisible visible. I answered emails with clarity at certain hours. I refused the reflex to append apologies to proposals. I practiced saying no as a full sentence. I kept the spoon as an anchor object, but moved it into micro-rituals. I touched it before a call, before opening a file, before signing anything. The spoon was now a note of ensemble. Posture. I received a call from a young man who said my tone in an earlier email had changed how he treated his own business. He had been kinder to his staff, and profits increased. These were not fireworks. They were plumbing. Inside me, understanding shifted into speech I could use outwardly. I practiced the tone that invited trust without pleading. We can do this responsibly, I would say. We will deliver what we promise. The sentence did not need qualifiers. It sat like a beam. People responded. I also learned the ethical guardrails the entity had insisted upon without preaching. Word matters. If I declared a state, I had to hold the work that came with it. The ritual could not be a shortcut to irresponsibility. Abundance did not mean neglect. It meant capacity matched with care. I felt the seriousness of that like a weight at the sternum. I built new loops, short affirmations that landed in my chest and in the voice. I am the field that opportunity grows toward. I breathe open. I meet the world steady. I accept help and honor limits. They were not slogans. They were instructions. I said them when I sat at the table. I said them before calls. They tightened the rope along my spine. A week later, the entity touched my wrist, and, without lights, without spectacle, it compressed a final note into my bone. Permission to teach by doing. I woke with a phrase in my mouth, ready and simple. The phrase would become my public test to give others if they asked. Sit. Breathe. Become the person who already keeps what she asks for. Mini cliffhanger. The final gesture would ask me to leave a trace in the world, not a story, but a living example. The mentor's departure was near, and with it a responsibility would arrive. When the entity first dissolved into the dark of my ceiling, it left me with a small afterimage of pressure on my wrist and a quiet like the moment after a bell stops. The silver glyph that had lived there changed again. This time it shimmered and withdrew, as if folding into the skin. The spoon remained. I began to notice that I no longer needed to check the shape on my wrist to remember. The frequency had been internalized. In the days that followed, small people entered the orbit of the new field. A woman from a local cooperative knocked on my office door and asked if I could mentor a young accountant she trusted. She smelled of laundry and earnest worry. I said yes. She left a recipe and a thank you note. A neighbor began to leave me oranges in the winter. Marcos, over coffee, confessed he had been wrong to call me delusional. He apologized in a way that made room for both of us to be real. Laura, my sister, called late at night from a hospital corridor and said, "I could not sleep until I told you my doctor said your calm on the phone made me breathe like a human again." Those are the metrics I came to track: steady relationships, fewer alarms, small returns of trust. I began to teach by example, not by lectures, but by invitations. I met with one eager graduate who wanted a silver bullet. She wanted a phrase, a guarantee. We sat on a low bench outside a cafe. The air tasted of diesel and fried dough. I told her what I had been given in a human form. Practice. Seek your body. Breathe open. Make one public act that you can follow through on, I said. She laughed softly, as if both insulted and soothed. 2 months later, she sent a short video. She had kept the practice. Her small consultancy had doubled. She held up a jar of something she had made and said, half in wonder, half in apology, "It changed the way my clients listen." The glyph on my wrist, now a memory, reminded me of limits. Power has a fragile edge. I learned to guard my language. I did not promise miracles to strangers. I emphasized endurance. I encouraged small experiments and measurements. I set boundaries so my own attention could be consistent, not scattered. The entity had never asked me to be a prophet. It had asked me to be a field. That sounded less romantic and more useful. As months spread, there were ripples I had not expected. Former employees who had left embarrassed by hardship returned to ask for advice. A local charity invited me to advise on simple bookkeeping. The work was humbling and real. A young father whose marriage had frayed came to tell me, quietly, that he had used a version of the loops to rebuild small rituals with his children. He said the smallest proof was his daughter's laughter in the morning, a sound that had been rare. The world accepted the frequency not because of spectacle, but because of habitual presence. Marcos and I rebuilt our partnership differently. He remained skeptical of anything I couldn't prove, and I remained careful to give proof. We divided responsibilities with new precision. Where before we had argued about fear, now we argued about numbers and timelines and deliverables. The difference was that my tone no longer jittered with panic. My steadiness made him trust the ledger again. Trust returned in measured increments. The day I decided to open my door to others formally, I wrote a short ritual on a scrap of paper and pinned it by the coffee maker. Posture, breath, seed word, small public act. People came at first because they were curious. Then they came because something in their lives needed the discipline that the ritual offered. We met in a small room once a week. The meetings were practical and Spartan. No chanting, no theatricality, just the slow work of retuning posture and attention. The spoon became a joke and then a gift. One man who had come out of unemployment handed me a wooden spoon he had carved himself. He said, "This is my anchor now." I kept it in a drawer like other proofs. The entity's parting had been a passage, not a disappearance. I felt its absence as a widening responsibility. The frequency I carried attracted people who resonated and repelled those who did not. Some called it luck, others called it discipline. I stopped arguing the name. I showed the method. My life altered structurally, not in grand illusions, but in practicalities, better contracts, steady payments, the small completion of a repair before winter, a neighbor who watched my plants when I traveled. Money no longer felt like an enemy to be fought. It became a tool I managed with calmer hands. My chest learned a new barometer, not excess pride, not numbed fear, but a steady warmth that recorded the world's answers. Before the final silence of that visit, before the blue light closed its eyes, the entity had said, "You will not need the spoon forever. You will need the habit." It was right. The spoon lives in a drawer now. At night, I sometimes touch the space on my wrist where the glyph once lived and feel a warmth like an old story's last word. There is a whisper I keep for you because the entity left it as much for me as for anyone. The practice is not about winning the world. It is about embodying a quality that makes certain outcomes easier. It asks for repaying the world in responsibility, not exploiting it. It asks for a steady center. I look at the city now and know that the light will visit others. I am a modest lighthouse on a quiet shore. People will come if they are ready. Some will laugh. Some will be moved. The frequency does not require belief. It requires practice. Mini cliffhanger. And sometimes, when the night is very still, I sense a new pulse on the horizon, not the same light, but a far signal, as if another door is waiting to open and my work must now extend beyond the room I have built. Some nights I still wake with the taste of that blue light on my tongue. It is not the light itself I miss. It is the permission the light gave me, a permission that settled in my bones like a returned relative. The world I walk now is the same city I always knew. Cracked sidewalks, coffee shops that smell of oil and sugar, buses that groan. But something inside the city has a different gravity for me. My days carry the small architecture of a ritual. I wake. I place my feet. I breathe open. I say the words I was taught quietly, as if greeting a friend, and I move out into life. The small acts stack. The small acts become a floor I can stand on. I keep my spoon in a drawer. Sometimes, when the drawer opens, the spoon glints like a memory. It is an ordinary spoon, scratched, weighty, a little too smooth at the handle. For a while it was an amulet. Then it became a habit object. Now it is simply an instrument I use to remember the work, posture, breath, word, micro-action. I touch the spoon when I need to anchor. I do not worship it. I use it the way a carpenter uses a square. It aligns me. The people who come through my door come because they want proof. They want the miracle to be packaged and delivered. They want the bullet and the guarantee. So I show them my work. Not theatrics. Not prophecy. A chair, a table, a cup of bitter coffee. I asked them to stand. I asked them to breathe 3 times like a metronome. I asked for a word once small. I teach with rituals and constraints. We meet in the small room with the chipped window where a strip of light always falls across the rug. We begin the same way. Feet grounded, breath measured, one word declared. Then each person names one small public act. No grand promises. Just one thing. Call the landlord, show up at the clinic, deliver the invoice without apology. The first months we measured results like a ledger: fewer missed rent payments, one recovered relationship, one business that stopped leaking cash. The ledger taught them to trust the practice because the practice taught them to be reliable. Reliability is magnetic. The loops I whisper to myself have become the marrow of my mornings. They are not slogans. They are stakes and instructions. I say them quietly so they nest in my throat and sternum. I am the field that opportunity grows toward. I breathe open. I meet the world steady. I accept help and honor limits. Sometimes I shorten them. Sometimes I make them specific. I am steady. I show up. I finish what I ask for. Those phrases are not charms. They restructure attention. They act like keys that open doors of choice. When I say them, my voice matches my posture. When my voice matches my posture, other people feel a permission to move differently around me. Contracts become clearer. Negotiations become easier. People offer respect instead of grudging cooperation. The world does not become soft, it becomes honest. There were costs. My family didn't understand at first. Marcos, always the skeptic, took a long time to step into the room where I taught. His doubts were not cruelty. They were a tether to reality for him. He tested the method like a man testing a new tool. Cautious, literal, precise. He demanded numbers and timelines. I learned to give him both. We rebuilt a partnership that no longer depended on me, soothing his fear with promises. We built agreements he could audit. Trust returned in receipts and schedules. That was one kind of victory, the translation of inner frequency into outer reliability. Others left. Some who had been close found the shift intolerable. They preferred a version of me still folded in scarcity. Change is a small earthquake. It rearranges rooms. You find corners where old friends used to sit, and now strangers take their place. That ache was real. I learned to sit with it. I learned that the field draws like to like. It also repels what is not aligned. That is not punishment. It is a sorting mechanism. I am often asked what the entity said before it left. People want the blueprint. They want the formulas. They want something that can be printed and framed. What it left me was less tidy. It left a sentence that is a tempering bar. It left a protocol I could teach by doing. It left a last touch on my wrist that burned away into skin. The last phrase it gave was short and exact. Sit. Breathe. Become the person who already keeps what she asks for. There was no sermon in that line. There was a command and a promise. I learned to measure success differently. Not in zeros on a bank screen alone. The first metrics were the small returns of trust one could see in people's faces. The neighbor who used to avoid my stoop began leaving a basket of lemons. A former client who had once dismissed me as too soft returned with an emergency audit and a check that kept the team employed. A daughter of a friend told me, one morning through a phone that was shaking with sleep, that my call the night before had been the first time in months she could breathe. Those were the tallies that mattered. They were not flashy. They were real. There were also larger shifts. A small cooperative asked me to mentor a young accountant. I said yes and found myself teaching less about accounting formulas and more about habit. She kept to the ritual: feet, breath, word, act. 6 months later, she sent a short video. Her consultancy doubled. She held up a jar of preserves she sold at a street fair and laughed because her clients were listening differently. Micro rituals scaled into business practices. People who learned to keep their word began drawing partners who also kept theirs. I learned the ethics of the field the hard way. With more power came temptation. One morning, after a string of unexpected contracts, I felt a lightness that flirted with vanity. The seed word felt thin. I had to return to the stern instruction the entity had given. Word matters. If you declare, you must do. The field is not a trick to extract advantage. It insists on reciprocity. It rewards capacity, not cunning. I taught others the same. If you say you will deliver, deliver. If you accept help, make space for the help to be usable. Abundance demands integrity. Sometimes the work asked me to be small. Not small in effect, but modest in posture. I would show up at a local charity with a stack of invoices and a pencil and spend an afternoon making the books less chaotic. I sat on hard chairs and breathed and taught someone how to invoice on a line that made sense. A woman there looked up at me and cried once, quietly, and said, "You made this simple. We can keep the lights on now." That kind of return is not measured in profit margins. It is measured in people who can sleep. When I teach now, the language is spare. No slogans. No chants. A clear protocol. Anchor the feet. Breathe open 3 times. Speak your identity as a verb. Make one small public act you can complete. We practice it until the nervous system remembers. The practice is not a promise of fortune. It is an invitation to show up as someone who can hold what comes. There are rituals I never vocalize. Before a big meeting, I stand in my doorway for a moment and feel the cool of the hall underfoot. I check my shoulders. I say the seed words to myself. I imagine the meeting's smallest good outcome and then imagine the work required to make that outcome respectable. That is the difference between a dream and a plan. The frequency opens a field. The plan pays the bills. The change inside me took hold quietly. My chest no longer tightened when the bank called. My mornings have a steadier temperature. My hands do not tremble when I write a check. My shape altered more in small calibrations than in any dramatic posture. My voice lost the smoke of pleading and gained a clearer timbre. That shift invited different work. People who needed someone frantic or desperate did not seek me. People who needed steady partner came. That trade-off clarified my life. I continue to practice the loops. I teach them with variations. Here are the ones I use when a fear rises that asks for proof. I am the field that opportunity grows toward. I meet the world as a keeper of what I ask for. When I need to remember capacity rather than wish for it, I shorten them to a single pulse. I am steady. I finish what I name. Each loop touches the body differently. Saying, "I am steady," lowers my heart rate. Saying, "I finish what I name," tightens the rope along my spine and clears my throat. The phrases are tools that condition the body toward consequence. Sometimes, in the late hours, I feel a new pulse on the horizon. It is not the same blue that visited me. It is further away, a distant rhythm in the city's copper wires, a vibration in the way the moon hangs. I sense it like the first rumble of a train far down the line. It suggests another kind of work, not more of the same, but an extension. The field I keep seems to be attracting other frequencies. People who resonate come to sit. People who do not, leave. That is how fields grow. They are selective by nature. The mentor did not leave a roadmap beyond the small protocol, but it left me with an imperative: live as a reference. That became my form of teaching. I stopped promising that anyone who practiced would become wealthy overnight. I stopped offering miracles as a product. I began to show up and keep my appointments with life so thoroughly that my neighbors could see the pattern. Some began to copy it. Some resisted. The job of a field is not to convince. It is to outlast doubt. If you stand in front of a mirror now, I will ask you a question I ask my students. Can you see, in the tightness at the mouth or the flutter at the eyes, the hint of a small blue light? Not as a literal glow, but a readiness. A readiness to be the person who keeps what she requests. That readiness is a portal. It opens when you practice enough to make it habit. Before I finish this account, there are 2 small instructions I give freely. One is practical. When you make a public promise, a small one to begin with, anchor it in a micro action you can complete within 24 hours. Do the thing. The second is moral. When help arrives, make the help usable. Keep your end of the exchange. The field rewards reciprocity. I will end with a brief practice. Stand. Plant your feet. Feel the cool floor under your soles. Inhale slow. Hold the center a beat. Exhale long. Say the phrase once. If you want to stay on this path, subscribe to these stories. Share where you read them from city and country, and tell me the smallest act you will commit to today. Your comment becomes a small practice shared. It becomes a testable event. This is my final loop for now. I carry it like a light in the pocket of my shirt. I breathe open. I meet the world steady. There is another rhythm on the far horizon. I hear it like wind through copper. It asks only that I keep my field clean and my promises kept. When the time comes, I will stand at the door and open it. Until then, I keep to the ritual. I keep the spoon in the drawer. I keep the work.